Hello, this is take two. Welcome to Critical Weight Theory, and I've got a review of a TV pilot that tried to make politics cool. So, this is a failed series that I'm highlighting here, and the first episode of it, DC, which came out in the year 2000. So, yes, back when flip phones, network dramas, and a moment when television tried to answer a strange question: what if political interns were treated like teen drama stars? So that's what happened in the pilot episode of DC. The show premiered on April 2nd, 2000, set in Washington, D.C., and it had a simple idea: follow a group of young, idealistic interns stepping into the world of politics for the first time. They have big dreams, big egos, and very quickly, big compromises. And I guess one of the compromises is that if you watch a show like this, you might not even remember exactly what happened toward the end. So it might kind of fry your brain because after I got done watching this, it was like in one ear, out the other, or in one eye, out the other, however you want to view it. And the series starred Jacinda Barrett, Mark Paul Gosselaar, Kristana Loken, who appeared in Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines as the sexy female Terminator. You also had Gabriel Olds, who apparently nowadays is in trouble over sex related allegations. And you've got some other people who starred in this film, or not film, TV show episode. And at the center of it all is a character named Mason Scott. He arrives in DC with ambition written all over him. He's confident, driven, and immediately positioned as the guy to watch. Why are we watching him? Well, I'm not quite sure, but he's there on the screen. He's the kind of character who believes he's going to change the system until the system starts changing him, I guess. Or something like that. To be honest, I don't even recall exactly what his politics were in the episode. It just seems like vague stuff about making the world into a better place or something like that. So from that vague place, the pilots it spreads the interns out across different political offices, and it's just not that exciting of a show, to be honest. The episode isn't really about policy; it's more about people, and right away the conflicts start to take shape. You've got some sort of ambition. Again, it's relatively vague, and it's a clash between that and the personal values, the career versus, I guess, whatever sort of political opinions they have. And the interns begin to see how decisions get made behind closed doors, and it's not always pretty. So there's a tension between what they thought politics would be and what it actually is. It's sort of like they say you don't want to go to a slaughterhouse to see how your meat gets made. You just want to have the sandwich, and that kind of thing. But like I said, it's just too vague. Like I watched this expecting it to be a little more interesting, but I really didn't get that much out of it, in terms of like what the characters actually believe or anything like that. You got to keep in mind this is early 2000s network TV. This episode is it's more about like the relationships, relationships, and the romance. The sparks, awkward moments, and stuff like that. Shifting alliances, kind of like soap opera kind of stuff. It's the soap opera social dynamics, and every conversation feels like it could turn into either a relationship or a rivalry kind of thing. And really, the politics are pretty much kept aside. So tonally, the show goes straight into that era's style. You got glossy visuals, attractive young professionals, and a focus on character drama. And it feels less like a political series and more like a coming of age story of some sort that just happens to take place in Washington and involve tangentially some politicians. It's really the fact that politics is the backdrop that actually kind of makes the show boring. Like I'd rather have it be more front and center. It's more about the relationships than a real story that involves politics. It's like why even have it as sort of a politically themed show if the politics are vague. I guess they didn't want to offend people with this one. So watching it now, there's, you know, I guess something maybe interesting about that choice, if you really think about it, especially when you compare it to how politics looks today. You know, a lot of people, they're burnt out with politics even more than back then. So back then, this reflected sort of the normal view of things. Things were just relatively normal and all that kind of stuff. But a 2025 Gallup poll found that 62% of Americans of American adults believe a new political party is needed, while only about 3 in 10 think the current two-party system does an adequate job. And that kind of dissatisfaction wasn't quite framed that same way back in 2000, but you can still see the seeds of it here, um, with the way the characters are, vaguely referring to the need to change the system and that kind of stuff. But it wasn't so rotten that they felt any sort of pressure to pay attention to political issues at the time, at least as far as I can tell. The interns in DC, they walk in believing that the system works, and I guess the tension comes from realizing that it might not work out perfectly or something like that. So, that's really the non-specific sort of idea or impression that you get if you watch this pilot episode. As for the show itself, it didn't last long. It was canceled after, I think it was 7 episodes that got released, and it had low ratings. And I think that's part of why it's remembered the way it is. Not as a hit, but as an experiment. And in my opinion, it might have actually maybe done better if it had more specific policy aspects to it, or at least emphasize those more. Because I really don't remember anything about that. It was like too vague for me to latch on to. And I guess there was, some scrambling attempt here to blend teen drama with political intrigue, just as something different. Something like, what if you took a youth focused series and dropped it into the halls of power? And it never quite figured out its balance. It was too soft for a serious political drama and too political for a pure relationship show. And that's why it just fizzled out, I think. Still, there's something kind of interesting about it. It's a snapshot of a moment when television thought politics could be packaged as, aspirational and romantic and all that kind of stuff. So it was before things got louder due to the racist politics that were sort of reborn after September 11th, before things got all trumped up. Like, you don't get the sense that these characters are dealing with right wing extremism or anything like that. And, it's not like the political drama is front and center. This was, before audiences would have had a different view about Washington I mean, to a large extent, anyway. I mean, there were always people who soured on Washington, but we're talking 26 years ago. Things were at least vaguely more normal back then. This was pre September 11th, like I just said, and it seemed like the world just got increasingly rotten after 9/11, or exponentially more rotten, you could say. And this show really does remind me of 1990s politics a little bit, when it seemed like some of the very worst aspects of our system were perhaps dying down. We didn't have as many. I guess I would say there was seemingly a prospect that we would not have the military industrial complex running around the globe as much, and stuff like that. The show doesn't avoid, you know, uh, politics altogether, but it certainly seems to avoid controversy. You know, it seemed like American politics at the time were becoming relatively controversy free, and I think the show kind of gets into that a little bit, that vibe. So in a way, the show is a glimpse into what was and what could have been if society had kept becoming less radically right wing in some key respects, and if society had just kept being more normal to the point where a show like this might have had more of a fighting chance. Of course, this show did not last, but obviously some people thought it would, so they filmed 7 episodes of it. And, if I can find the other episodes, maybe I'll get into them and be more specific about what happens. But, it's just an interesting way of looking back at what the social vibes were like back, like, over 25 years ago. Well, that's it for this episode. And, if you want me to look at another short lived series that tried to do something slightly different, maybe a little bit bolder than this, I'll probably look into that. I'll add it to my list at least. So until then, thanks for listening. Sorry for being so vague, but the show was kind of boring anyway. So whatever. Have a good one.